Good evening, everyone. My name is Kieran. I'm your MC for this evening of deception and lies. I promise it won't be all deception and lies. Just as we're... That could have been a lie. He's onto me already. Just as we're getting started, a few people I'd like to thank. First of all, everyone from the New England Northwest Regional Science Hub for helping me put all this together. You've been a great help. Thank you. The Wicklow, of course, for hosting us and providing us with some nibbles. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Annamun people tonight, and would like to pay tribute to their elders, past, present, and those still emerging. Okay, so... Oh, and of course, Inspiring Australia for providing us the funding to put these events on. So, fake news. Who's heard some fake news this week? No one. That is a lie. I better just thank our speakers for this evening. First up, we've got Dr. Jean Holly, Dr. Adam Hamlin, the almost Dr. Tim Frauenfelder, and later on, Dr. Manu Saunders. Those first three are going to try and pull the wool over your eyes very shortly. Keep an eye on them. Okay, so fake news. What are we talking about there? Fake news is misleading, wrong, out of context information. It's something that is intentionally misleading but presented as the truth. Most commonly we find fake news in sort of political contexts, usually stuff Donald Trump is saying. Tonight we're not thinking too much along political lines, too much, I hope. We're looking more at potentially inaccurate or misleading reporting of scientific findings. So perhaps oversimplification of news stories or of scientific findings. When science gets reported badly in the news, it can create a very serious problem because people lose their trust in the scientific process. When scientists then go on to say, things like, we need to take action on climate change, or don't cut down all these trees, things live there, they can get ignored. Or also things like medical studies. If people say vaccines work and they go, oh no, they don't, that also causes pretty serious issues, as we've seen earlier this year in Samoa. Or was it last year? I lose track of time. How do we spot fake news? This is a fantastic little infographic that I grabbed off of the International Federation of Library Associations. It's a great little toolkit to help you critique things you see, especially on your social media feeds. I won't go through all of these because I'd like to get to some truth and lies, but just do things like Google headlines. Do other news sources say the same thing? Does the content in the article match the headline? Quite often you'll get sensational headlines that don't really match reality. Does the article actually give you enough information to find the source of the data, the scientific study that was done? If they don't, it's not necessarily a case that it's fake news, but it might be a cause for suspicion. Check that it's not a joke. I've seen so many times on my own Facebook feed people sharing stuff from The Chaser, from The Onion, Batuta Advocate, going, oh my God, look what they've done now. And it's satire, people. It's satire. And maybe every now and then just ask yourself, am I biased? The answer is undoubtedly yes. Everyone is biased. I'm biased. Biases arise from our brain taking little shortcuts when trying to process large amounts of information. So it's unavoidable, but we can get around it if we're aware of what our biases are. Has anyone come across this headline before? Is anyone drinking gin at the moment? This is... Oh, some people look guilty. Beware that man. All right. This is possibly my favourite example of science reported badly. It started making the rounds in 2015. If you like gin, you're more likely to have malevolent personality traits. This was quite a concern to me when this came out because myself and my other PhD colleagues would blow off steam on a Monday morning at our local gym bar. And we had to wonder, are we all psychopaths? It just keeps going. And it's been doing the round for years. I don't know how easy this is to see, but the most recent one was Christmas Eve last year. Having access to a university library database, we looked up the original article that inspired these news stories. It never mentions the word gin once. Yeah. It mentions tonic water. It mentions beer and coffee and other bitter things, because the study actually found a very weak correlation between negative personality traits and a preference for bitter tasting food and drink. That's the origin of this news story. Somehow, no one cared to mention that, by the same logic, if you drink beer, you're probably a psychopath, or if you drink coffee, you're probably a psychopath. Who's had a beer or coffee in the last 24 hours? Most of the room. Fantastic. Watch your backs. So this basically comes down to, this is the key example that I wanted to use for what I mean by bad science reporting. Not all science reporting is like this, obviously. There's obviously plenty of good science reporting as well. But this is the sort of stuff that makes people go, scientists, nah, it's all a conspiracy. They're just not doing their job. Alrighty, now here's an example from just this week. Anglia Ruskin University study suggests having 10 or more sexual partners in your lifetime increases your risk of cancer. Yeah, that was my reaction too. This was an interesting one, because this was a case of perhaps the actual study itself is a little bit flawed, and also the reporting on it is not ideal. You'll notice this came out on Valentine's Day, February 14th. The sun is just in the wrong spot there. So this was the example I'd like to use for check other sources, check what other people are saying, because The Conversation, which is a fantastic site, all of its articles are written by actual researchers and experts in the field. If you want good quality science information, go to The Conversation. I can't recommend it highly enough. But, you know, almost straight away they came out with, it's neither totally correct nor in any way helpful. And it's true, because headlines like this increase the stigma around having multiple sexual partners, or, and even just the study itself had a few flaws. They made a few fundamental assumptions that if you engage in the sort of lifestyle that would lead to more than 10 intimate partners in your lifetime, you're going to engage in other risk-taking things. They also never said why there was a risk or why this link exists. They just said it was there, which is also not very helpful. Check in with fact-checking websites. They're great as well. Oh, that's come down very low on the screen. The other week, the illustrious Mr. Dutton claimed that climate change had nothing to do with the recent bushfire crisis, and it was all arsonists. 250 arsonists have been charged in our bushfire season. ABC Fact Check corrected him. Yeah. So, yes, fact-checking websites, they tend to focus more on political claims, but with politicians claiming scientific stances, like, no, the argument's not settled on climate change. These can also be a valuable source. And always read the entire article before sharing. This is the one I'll leave you with before I hand over to our first speaker. 70% of Facebook users only read the headline of science stories before commenting. Now, the beauty of this article, the entire 500 words of text below that headline were lorem ipsum. That's the Latin gibberish placeholder text used in document formatting. It was a satirical post. The Science Post is a satirical website. And this went viral because people saw that headline and they shared it. This is why we need to check the information that we're sharing. Alrighty, that's enough serious stuff from me. I'm going to hand over to some of our researchers now. We've got 3 fantastic researchers from UNE here tonight who are going to try and deceive you. Each of them are going to give a brief introduction about their area of research, share 3 interesting facts with you, and one of those facts will be a lie. It is up to you to try and catch them out. Sound good? Yes? No? Oh gosh, we're not very engaged tonight, are we? Too much gin and tonic. All right, I'm going to invite Dr. Jean Holly up here. Jean is a wonderful entomologist. Yes, round of applause for Jean. Alrighty. So after each speaker, we're going to have a very quick Q&A. You're only allowed to ask questions that can be answered yes, no, or maybe to try and catch them out. Maximum of 4 questions. Alrighty. Take it away.
Alrighty.
Oh yeah, you need that too.
Okay, hello everyone. Let's get this going. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about dung beetles. So we're just going to go through a little bit of life history of dung beetles so that you can be in a good position to think critically about the facts that I present to you. Okay. First of all, hands up, who knows what a dung beetle is? Yay, that fills my heart with joy. So dung beetles are awesome little creatures. They breed, feed and live in manure. The adults eat the dung or drink the dung juices. So they go to a dung pat, they scoop up poo in their mouth, they squeeze it out, drink the juice and spit the rest out. The larvae, which are the grubs or the baby dung beetles, eat the solid parts of the manure, so they have really strong chewing mouth parts. They can chew up the solid poo. And dung beetles are really unique because they look after their babies really well. So they build these little broods for them out of poo. They lay their eggs in these poo broods and the babies grow and develop inside their broods. So they have a lot of parental care for their babies, which is quite unique in insects. All right, so to show you what I mean, what dung beetles, or to demonstrate what dung beetles do, we'll go through the life cycle of a dung beetle. So it starts up the top there with a new adult. The new adults emerge after it's rained or if it's warmed up a little bit. So they come out of the ground, they're in the ground, they come out of the ground. The first thing that they do is go to a nice juicy dung pile to find 2 things, food and sex. So once they've found a partner, they will pair up and leave the dung pat and they'll make these underground tunnels underneath the dung pat. Once they've made their tunnels, they will take poo down into these tunnels and pack them into tight little balls called broods. In each brood, the female will lay an egg. That egg will hatch out and it will start eating the manure in its brood. It will get bigger and bigger and bigger, turn into a pupa, and then it will turn into an adult that will emerge and start the life cycle again. So as you can see, they bury a lot of poo, they recycle nutrients, they clean up the pastures. They're amazing little animals. Okay. The way that they use poo is different for different species. Dung beetles can be grouped into broadly 3 functional groups. So we have the dwellers, also known as the endocoprids. We have the rollers, or the teleocoprids. And then we have the tunnelers, and they're also known as the paracoprids. Okay, so the life cycle that we went through just then was a tunneler. The tunnelers, as the name suggests, they make their tunnels under the dung pat and they take their broods underneath the dung pat. Then we have the rollers. So a lot of people are probably familiar with a roller. The roller makes a little pile of poo, shapes it into a ball, rolls that away from the dung pat, and then they'll do one of two things. They'll either bury that ball, or then they'll just fix it to some vegetation or fence posts or something like that. Then they'll lay their egg in it, and then the life cycle goes through the larvae, the pupa, and the adult. So these are the ones that David Attenborough talks about a lot. These are the ones that a lot of people are familiar with. Then we have the dwellers. The dwellers aren't as industrious as the tunnelers and the rollers. They just have their broods inside the dung pat. So they don't make tunnels, they don't roll away, they just have their broods inside the dung pat. And sometimes they bury them just below the soil surface, but for the most part, development happens inside the pat. Okay, so that's the three functional types. We've got dwellers, rollers, and tunnelers. So we're ready for some dung beetle facts? Okay, so as we go through these facts, two things that I want you to keep in mind. Firstly, these facts pertain to roller dung beetles, and secondly, it's not all species of rollers. It's just been looked at in a few species. Fact number 1. Dung beetles wearing hats get lost. So, dung beetles that have little covers over their head can't see the sky. And when they can't see the sky, they can't navigate. They can't see where they're going. They take longer to roll their brood balls to where they want to go. And when they do roll their brood balls, they take a more indirect path. So they can't see where they're going. And the conclusion is that dung beetles navigate, or this species in particular, using the Milky Way. Fact number 2. Dung beetle babies have cleaner ants. So when roller dung beetles make their broods, they orientate themselves towards an ant's nest. They don't bury their broods at the ant's nest, they bury their broods around the periphery of the ant's nest. Now the ants will go to the broods. Now these broods are only buried very, very shallowly in the soil. The ants will actually go to the broods and pick off the muck on the outside of the brood. So that can include things like fungi, bacteria, things like that. So the ants are doing that because they're getting a feed, and the dung beetles are benefiting because the babies inside the brood are kept nice and clean, and they are at a lower risk of getting a fungal infection. Fact number 3. Dung beetles can be tricked into burying poo-scented seeds. So this is a case of deception by plants. So it is actually quite common for dung beetles to bury seeds that is embedded in manure. So if a cow eats a lot of grass seeds, the dung beetle makes a brood ball and rolls it away, and it rolls away grass seeds that is in the poo. That's actually quite common. But this is really unique in that the seeds have evolved to look and smell like antelope poo. So the dung beetle rolls it away thinking that it's got a nice bit of poo, goes to eat it or lay an egg in it after it's buried it, and it's only then that it realises that it's been deceived. So the dung beetle gets nothing for that, but the plant just had its seed rolled away and planted. Okay, those are the 3 facts. I guess we'll hand over for questions.
Alrighty. Sounds like we've got some breaking news this evening, and because I can't resist a bit of clickbait. Dung beetles get lost while wearing hats. Dung beetles employ ants to clean up their young. You won't believe what else. Plants trick dung beetles into burying poo-scented seeds. The reason will shock you. It will not shock you, it's pretty obvious. Alrighty, we'll open the floor up to a couple of quick questions. Your questions must be able to be answered with yes, no, or maybe. Any questions for Jean?
Did you enjoy saying poo so much?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone?
Not sure if we're asking questions about the sensational headlines, but the dung beetles wearing hats, so this is some kind of natural covering that's sitting on that particular species of dung beetle. Is that what you're getting at with that?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Lab conditions. Any other? Ooh.
How do dung beetles roll their balls during
Okay, so that question was, do dung beetles roll their bowls during the day? The answer is yes.
But not all do.
Oh.
But I felt it was a bit misleading.
Oh, you're worried about being misleading, are you?
Right now.
Alrighty, let's get a show of hands. Which one do we think is a lie? Do we think it's the first one, dung beetles wearing hats get lost? Oh, a few people. Do we think it's the second one, dung beetles employ ants to clean up after they're young? Oh, interesting. Or the third one, plants trick dung beetles into bearing poo-scented seeds. Oh, couple of people, alrighty. Let's run this through our fact checker. Oh, it's come up in the wrong spot. That should... None of it's true, it's all a lie, it's a conspiracy. No, which one is actually the lie, Jean?
Dung beetles do not have a mutualistic relationship with ants. Well done.
You guys seem to be pretty on the ball. I think that was the majority answer there. Alrighty. We'll move on. Could Dr. Adam Hanlon join me on stage? Thank you very much, Jean.
Thank you, Kieran. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming along tonight. It's really interesting that I should be up here talking to you about fact or fiction, because if we think about the lowest form of evidence, which is the anecdote, and that's what's caused all these problems with medicinal marijuana. I smoked a joint and, oh, my back feels a little bit better. Okay, and now it's a thing. People actually smoke joints because they got chronic back pain, but there's no evidence. It's an anecdote. The second lowest form of evidence is the argument from authority. So Kieran's asked me to come up here and be the authority in my area and tell you 3 facts or fictions. So the best form of evidence is the double-blinded, peer-reviewed article. Okay, so you do your research passionately and you do your data dispassionately, and that's where you get the best evidence. I do neuroscience at UNE. I'm part of the Brain Behaviour Research Group. We're a collaboration of researchers, various backgrounds, working in both human studies. I do preclinical work, so I do rat models of neurological disorders, is my field. We're really interested in understanding the link between overt behaviour. Now, our overt behaviour is what the wrinkly bit on the top of our brain tells us what we're doing, our storyteller. But it's really deeper than that. That's where the secrets are, our covert behaviour, what's going on deep in our subconscious mind that's driving these stories up in our brain. So we're really concerned with biomedical issues, really focusing on translational research. This is our long-term goal, of course. So I'm a behavioural neuroscientist working in preclinical rodent models. These are the sort of questions I like to ask about behaviour. What are the brain regions? So which bits of the brain are controlling our behaviour? We go down from that. What are the neurons within those brain areas that are controlling different parts of our behaviour? What's the circuitry? Who are they talking to, communicating with? What's the networks that underlie these behaviours? And finally, what's the chemicals they're using, the neurotransmitters that they use to control our behaviours? So using this approach, I've asked all sorts of questions about lots and lots of diseases, pain, addiction, Alzheimer's disease, etc. At the moment, these are some of the questions that I'm looking at in my lab, and a few of my students are here tonight, so thank you for coming. Really interested in how the brain develops very early on, particularly around early life traumas. Okay, so experiencing early life trauma, what that does to the development of the brain. Can that lead to mental disorders later in life? We're finding some really interesting data. That's what I mean about things may seem obvious, that might seem like a bad thing, early life trauma. When we look at the data dispassionately, I think we need to go back to 80s parenting. You know, go kick up the arse, not such a bad thing, be a little bit harsh. We're finding these rats are resilient, they're risk-taking, okay, they're not anxious and they're not depressed. So really interesting findings. I always keep an open mind, particularly when you're asking questions about the brain. Gut-brain axis is another one that's really out there at the moment. Again, it's probably a little bit ahead of its time. It's reported in the media a lot, or the gut microbiome. We know absolutely F all about the gut microbiome and its effect on the brain. Okay, the early days in the research. Shana over here, you can go talk to her later. She's looking at the effects of Prozac on the gut microbiome. So she feeds her rats little cookie ball doughs full of Prozac. And we're seeing what that does to the gut microbiome, how that might feed back to the brain. Potentially a therapeutic effect. Again, we've got no idea how antidepressants work either. As part of that, the chemists at uni cook up all sorts of interesting things for me, and I test them in the lab, looking for new antidepressants, anxiolytics as well. Lucy's over here. We're trying to find out why noisy miners are so smart. Okay, really interesting question. Looking at now links between, we're seeing Alzheimer's again on the rise. We're getting a second wave of Alzheimer's disease. We think maybe there's a link between diabetes, type 2, and Alzheimer's disease. So a double whammy potentially there. And a more rare disease here, looking at streptococcal infections. Okay, multiple streptococcal infections. And we get antibodies built up, they infiltrate the brain, and we're getting a paediatric neurological disorder, which is expressed as, it affects a part of the brain that's involved in our habit forming and movement. So we get a chorea, okay, we get shaking, and we also get OCD. Okay, so we're trying to understand those links as well. So that's what we do. How do we do it? We run lots of behavioural tests, so rats are really, really smart. Okay, so we can understand their behaviour by performing tests. We can look at pain, we can look at Pavlovian conditioning, we can look at their navigational skills, we can test anxiety, we can look at their motor skills. So we can really understand their behaviour. And then after we've measured their behaviour, the beauty of using a rat model is we can delve right down into the brain and find out what's going on. Okay, what are the brain areas? What are the neurons? What's their chemistry? So I can visualise the proteins in the brain. Up here, is that the one? No. That one at the top there. Oh, yeah, we're getting used to this. Okay, that's what happened when you take opioids for too long. Okay, that's a rat that's looking for cocaine in the middle there. That's what pain looks like. Even though this looks really beautiful, really not nice. Okay, that's a full stress response with cortisol released and opioids and all lots of nasty stuff. Neurogenesis, of course, we're getting new neurons born in the brain. So hopefully I've convinced you that I'm an expert. Okay, remember this is the second lowest form of evidence. Don't believe a word I said. Fact or fiction? So again, there's a lot of reports out about the ageing brain, what happens when we age. So a report came out recently that showed that throughout your life you will lose approximately 2,175,000,000 neurons throughout your life. 85,000 every day. That's about one every second. Okay? And this won't have any consequence on your cognitive abilities. Okay? Nothing. It's totally normal. Not a disease process at all. Another recent report that came out was a giant study on nuns. Okay, so they studied all these nuns, 700 nuns. And they came to the conclusion from this study that if you use it, okay, you don't lose it. So use it or lose it. So what they showed in this study was they provided evidence that people who participate in cerebrally challenging activities, okay, so keeping the brain fit and healthy and always challenging it can actually decrease the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Okay. And finally, I thought I'd go for an old news story from the 1950s. Okay, this is a 1950s news story. Hodgkin and Huxley. Okay, they showed that everything you experience, your fears, love, seeing something, hearing something, all that's required for that to occur is the movement of a sodium ion across a 5 nanometer piece of fat. Okay? Everything you do. Okay, so they're my 3 fact or fictions. Any questions?
Alrighty. I'll just grab the clicker there. Alrighty, because I can't resist clickbait. The surprising reason you're losing one brain cell every second. Brain training prevents Alzheimer's. This one weird trick could save your brain. And everything you know and love is really sodium. Alrighty, do we have any quick yes or no answer questions? James?
This study on nuns. The second one, the study, did you say it was on nuns?
Yes, the nun study.
Or was it a correlative study?
There was a longitudinal study where they measured their...
That's not yes or no. That's not yes or no.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I believe is the answer.
Yes. Could only be, yes. Yes.
Good, thanks.
Alrighty. Anyone else? Oh, one up the back. Oh, and your students are turning against you, by the way.
Are the number of neurons created in your brain similar to the number that are lost?
No.
Were the nuns used in study 2 the same nuns that were used in the 10 sex partners in your life creates cancer?
Yes. Yes, that was the same study we got together. Yeah.
In the sodium study, was that specifically sodium potassium pumps, or was it sodium potassium pumps specifically mentioned?
No.
Alrighty. Shall we take a vote? Alrighty. If you think that you're losing a brain cell every second is a lie, put your hand up. Okay. Hands up if you think that brain training will not prevent Alzheimer's. Ooh, interesting. And hands up if you think that everything you know and love is something besides sodium. Oh, interesting. Fact checking, and you can't save your brain with brain training.
It's a lie.
But most of you got that right as well. Very good. Alrighty, let's get Tim up here. Thank you, Adam. There we go. Excellent.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Tim. I'm a paleontology PhD student. So a little bit about me. I'm studying dinosaur teeth and their diet, specifically looking at the biomechanics, so how they were using their teeth, to possibly look at what they were eating and how they were eating, specifically within Australia, and how that relates globally to other places in the world that have dinosaurs. So I'm basically just a glorified dinosaur dentist, which is great, but throughout my studies at UNE, I've had the privilege to go all over the world to dig up dinosaurs, like this one here. This one works. This here is basically an entire skeleton of a duck-billed dinosaur, if anyone knows what they are. So it was really great to be able to dig that one up. Sorry? In Canada. Yeah. So I didn't give an introduction about dinosaurs. I figured everyone's seen Jurassic Park, and that's basically all you need to know. So I figured we'd start with fact one. We do know what the colours of dinosaurs, of some of them at least, were. There's about 9 dinosaurs that we know of their colours. We can get that from their skin or from their feathers. We look at the melanosomes. They're basically these organelles that are preserved in the cells that can be preserved in the rock. And their size and the structure and the placement that they find can identify it to a specific colour. So this one here is Borealis pelta from Alberta, Canada, and they know it was an orangey type of colour on top and more white on the bottom. This here is Anchiornis, which is really cool, like 80s pants it's got going on with its feathers. So it's really great. And this one up here is Microraptor. That's the 4-winged avian dinosaur, which is really, really cool. So we can get it from skin and feathers. Only 9 so far, but hopefully we find more in the future. So I know we've all heard that dinosaurs went extinct at the end Cretaceous extinction, roughly 65 million years ago. But that's not the case. There are still dinosaurs around today. There's about 10,000 species living around us. Some of them tried to kill you during September, October, November, especially at UNE. So they are pretty terrifying. The smallest dinosaur today, though, is the hummingbird. And even the chicken is a dinosaur, which is pretty crazy to think about, but it is. So number 3, the Tyrannosaurus rex that we all know and love is basically just purely a scavenger. It never hunted for its food. Jack Horner, prior to Jurassic Park, stated that it was a scavenger purely because there's no fossil evidence that it hunted. In its skull, it's got huge olfactory bulbs, so it could smell a carcass from miles and kilometres away. It had very tiny arms. You couldn't really do much with them to grab prey. All it had was its huge skull. And it also couldn't run very fast. So in Jurassic Park, it's chasing the car. That really couldn't happen. So it was basically just a lumbering oaf that just walked around looking for carcasses on the ground. And that is it. I don't know if my... Yeah, so which fact is fake? Find out.
You mean you've lied to us, Tim? No? No? All right, any quick questions, yes or no answers for Tim? Any...
Mine's a fake news question anyway. How fabulous were dinosaurs given the 9 colours?
Yes.
Do they know yet if birds are a monophyletic clade?
Maybe.
Could T-Rex catch other animals with its mouth?
Maybe.
Do you classify dinosaurs as only reptilian?
No.
Alrighty, shall we take a vote on the last set of clickbait we've got this evening? Alrighty, hands up if you think this is a lie. Scientist discovers the colour of dinosaurs. You won't believe how they really looked. Ooh, a few people. Alrighty, think dinosaurs are extinct? Think again. Couple, interesting. And king no more, T-Rex was a lazy scavenger. Ooh, interesting. Running it through our fact checker. And Tim, which one was it?
I don't remember.
No, of course, T-Rex is still the king. Alrighty, thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Alrighty, time for round 2. Now, the second part of tonight is going to be entirely truthful. We've got the lovely Manu Saunders about to speak for us, and she's promised me she's not going to lie too much. So I will hand over to her for some insect apocalypse narrative, I believe.
Thank you. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about apocalypse narratives and the exciting headlines like some of the ones Kieran was talking about. That first little exercise just made me realise, so I'm an entomologist, so I got genes facts and I was right on those. I got the others completely wrong. So that's a lesson in do not listen to a scientist if it is not their area of expertise, because they may not know what they're talking about. So I'm an ecologist at UNE. I specialise mostly on insects. And I'm specifically interested in communities, so how different species interact in the landscape, in different environments, and how those interactions structure ecosystems and affect us. So, this is a fact. There are lots of global environmental problems that we are currently facing that are really serious and are going to have devastating consequences. We need to do something about them. So we know this from decades of scientific evidence, research across all different disciplines. We know that all these things like land clearing and pesticides and intensive agriculture and all these things that are affecting the earth, contributing to climate change and public health issues and so on. These things are big problems. And this is why we get headlines like this, because they are big, scary problems that we need to do something about. News outlets love these sorts of stories because they can freak everyone out with headlines like this. The good news is that science has solutions for a lot of these problems. We also have decades of research in lots of different disciplines that investigate more deeply into these problems and give us ways and solutions of how we can deal with them. Humans are not separate from the environment. We are intimately linked with the natural environment around us, even when we live in cities and in houses and think that we've escaped nature. It ultimately always affects us. So another fact, protecting nature keeps us alive and happy, and we need to do more of it. We need to protect more nature. So this brings us to one of the big conundrums that conservation scientists are often dealing with, is public awareness of conservation problems, how to get people to care about conservation, because we need people to care so that we can stop these bad things happening to the earth. So take the example of a species like a koala that needs help, is threatened. To protect that species, we obviously need to protect its habitat. We need to make sure that it has somewhere to live, that the ecosystems that it depends on are stable and functioning. So how do we make sure that people protect these habitats so that these species will stay alive? We need people to have the money, contribute the money and willpower to actually want to keep these habitats around so that we can keep these animals around. How do people decide to give up their hard-earned cash and willpower? They generally make decisions based on information. In an ideal world, most people would make those decisions based on science and evidence from scientific research. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, and the majority of non-specialist public communities and audiences get most of their information from popular media and news. So this becomes a problem because of how science is portrayed in the news sometimes, and how environmental problems are portrayed in the news. So these are stereotypical images of science. These were, when you Google science and stock images, these are the sorts of pictures that come up. You don't see pictures of landscapes or ecosystems or ecologists out in the field catching animals or holding a butterfly net or whatever. You see pictures of scientists in lab coats in a lab playing with colourful liquids, telescopes, computers, that sort of thing. If you look on the websites of most major news outlets, you'll find that the science news is one tab, and there's a section for science news. If you scroll down through those stories, most of them are medical stories, technology stories, space stories, these sorts of stories. Stories about the environment or conservation or ecology don't generally get put into the science tab on news outlets. They are generally either in random sections depending on the context, or there's a separate tab for environment and nature. And most of these stories are usually fluffy, happy, pretty animals and cute things that we've discovered from different countries. So there is this disconnect in how we actually communicate ecological science to public audiences that potentially then drives how people actually appreciate environmental problems, ecological problems, and that ecologists and ecological science can present solutions for these problems. And we come back to these apocalypse headlines because this is generally how most news outlets think. This is how we get people's attention. We're not really sure what's going on. A lot of these problems are scary, but we don't really know because ecologists aren't really scientists, so we can't ask a scientist to help us. So let's just go, oh my God, freak out. Who's heard of the insect apocalypse? Who thinks that all the insects are about to die? Good. Yeah, well, let's go home then. So, another fact. Insects are in trouble. Insect populations around the world have been for a long, long time. We have lots and lots of evidence of this, struggling from lots of different things. These are just a small selection of studies that show that insects are under stress from lots of factors, including pesticides, pollution, climate change, habitat loss. All these things are affecting insects. Another fact, we need to care about insects more. People don't like them. Except me. Hands up if you like insects. Good. Preaching to the choir. So insects are actually the most diverse and abundant group of animals. So all the animals on Earth generally are divided into groups based on, similarities in biology or habitat and those sorts of things. So we group them by names like mammals and birds. The insects totally outweigh all other animals, all the other groups of animals. There are more insects on Earth, different types of insects. So this is species of insects. There are more species of insect on Earth than mammals or birds, etc. They are absolutely critical to ecosystem function. So they live everywhere. Everywhere you go, on land, in freshwater, in marine systems, on top of mountains, in ice, there are insects that specialise in those areas. There are insects in Antarctica. They live absolutely everywhere. And they are vital to keeping those ecosystems functioning and stable over time. We don't often think of that because we consider them all creepy crawly pests. But they are really, really important. And they have lots and lots of different values. They're not just critical to ecosystem function. They have lots of economic values, so pollinators contribute to crop pollination. They have intrinsic values. Lots of people have cultural associations with particular insects. They're really, really important to human society. They're also the most understudied and underappreciated, unfortunately. These are some of the headlines. This is just from a few months. This has gone on for years. So no wonder people hate insects. Some of the good headlines that we've seen about how terrifying insects are. They're worse than ghosts. A cockroach crisis. This was last year in September. Did anyone notice a few extra cockroaches around at home? That was the cockroach crisis. I love this one. Deadly disease-carrying mosquitoes are heading for the UK. They're like flying across the channel ready to eat people. Yeah. And you wonder why people go around killing insects. We also have things like this. So this is a really fun, free online game that you can just go to this website anytime when you're procrastinating and sit there for hours just killing arthropods. They move around on your screen and you just go bang, bang, bang and kill them all. Training people to get rid of insects and other invertebrates. This was a headline recently. So this is from the United States. The spotted lanternfly, this is fair enough. The spotted lanternfly is a major agricultural pest that's just come across from Asia and arrived in the United States. So Department of Agriculture's obviously get on it. We don't want this coming here. It's going to cause damage. That's all fine until you realise that the majority of the population cannot identify an insect. a lot of specialists have trouble identifying insects to species. So when you implore your residents of an entire state to just squash and smash every single thing that might look like a lanternfly, we have a little bit of a problem. And this is an example. So this was from Canberra just recently, where they had to publish a story in the Canberra Times to tell people to check before you kill, because they might not actually be wasps. Because, unfortunately, yes, these poor hoverflies were sprayed because the lady thought they were European wasps. So these are all the problems that we deal with, that we have to understand these trade-offs between, yes, some insects are dangerous, some are pests, some do cause damage. Sometimes we do have to kill insects when they are causing problems. But when we present this overall kind of story that all insects are bad, get rid of them, they're all going to kill you, a lot of people can get confused. So the insect apocalypse narrative sort of built out of this fear of insects. So this kind of started a couple of years ago in the popular media. So first of all, scientists have shown that there have been declines in particular species. This has been happening for some decades. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the insect apocalypse narrative arrived. So this is how it started. In late 2017, this study was published. This study itself is fine. It shows they did long-term sampling in a particular area of Germany and showed that there was a decline over time of the biomass of flying insects in these particular sites. The press release from the university of the lead author of this study claimed that the study showed a decline in other parts of the world too. So this was written in the actual official press release from the university about this study. So immediately the results from one little part of Germany have been extrapolated to evidence for the whole world. The media response was this, from one study, this one study. So that happened. That was end of 2017, and there was a bit of a flurry for a couple of months and then sort of died off as things do. Then about a year later, this study was published in another journal. And again, this was a very small scale, restricted study to one particular forest in Puerto Rico. And it showed, it had very, very, very restricted methods, by the way. And also claimed some very correlative links with temperature from a few kilometres away. But the author said that this showed that climate change was driving declines of insects in Puerto Rico. Fine, whatever. The press release from the university claimed that the entire Puerto Rico insect population was decimated. They also sort of linked in the article to rainforests everywhere in the world. And we all know that rainforests are very different in different parts of the world. So, and then this is the media response from popular news websites. The whole world's going to collapse. And so this, again, there was a little bit of flurry for a couple of months. Then we saw this paper, which has probably become the most famous one and is not very scientifically accurate, but has unfortunately become cited over and over again as evidence that this is happening. So this paper was published in early February last year, claimed global decline of all insects everywhere in the world. Press release, this 40%, we'll talk about that in a minute. Where did that come from? Again, catastrophic collapse, etc., etc. You get the idea, and it's kind of built from there. So I'd been sort of watching this evolve as this was happening and thinking, come on, this is like, why isn't anyone saying anything? Like, you know, we know that insects are in trouble, but this is a bit ridiculous. So we did a little bit of research with James O'Hanlon over here and another colleague, Jasmine Janes, over in Canada. So we went back through all the studies that this paper looked at, and we actually found that the bulk of studies that these media reports and these particular papers were claiming showing global insect decline actually were pretty much just from these two places, and mostly for a few of the big charismatic species like moths and butterflies, beetles, bumblebees. So yes, we're seeing declines for some species, but mostly in these northern hemisphere countries. Definitely not a global decline at the moment. It could be happening, we don't know, but there's no evidence for it. So this 40% of all insect species going extinct. Beware of all these nice round numbers that tend to get thrown about. So, some facts. There are 1 million species of insects known in the world. There's estimated to be about 5 million, but let's just go with the 1 million that we know of. So this is saying that apparently 400,000 species around the world are about to go extinct. So first of all, there is absolutely no published data of populations of most of the insects anywhere in the world. So if you just want to get down to the bare bones of it, we can't even say that because there is no data. The IUCN Red List, who's heard of the IUCN Red List? So that's, it has its limitations. It hasn't actually been able to assess all species because we know that's an impossible task, but it is the best available evidence we have when you want to be able to say, how many species are threatened, how many species are potentially in decline. So if we look at all the insects that have ever been assessed on the IUCN Red List, that's 0.8% of all known insect species that have been assessed. That's not declining, that's assessed. When we break those down, so over the last 100 years or so that we started this, we had 63 species of insects unknown to have gone extinct. At least 2 of those have been rediscovered, by the way, so that's good. Not making light of extinction, but these are numbers that we need to think about. The population trends so this is just of those 8,000 species, this is not of 1 million. So of those 8,000 odd species that have been assessed, that's the breakdown of what is known about their population trends. So we can see that only 10% of those have been confirmed to have populations in decline, which is bad, and we need to do something about it. But we still don't really know where this 40% came from. And I can't answer that tonight, sorry, because we don't really know where the 40% comes from. So if you see a news headline claiming that all 40% of insects are about to go extinct, yes, just read it carefully. So, to wrap up, these are the issues that scientists and communicators and journalists dealing with scientific stories face. So hyping science isn't new. People have been doing this forever. People have been doing this since classical times, since whenever. But it is more and more dangerous in today's age because of how far a story and how quickly a story can reach people on the other side of the world. So once upon a time you could tell a tall story to your mates or to your colleagues. You could even write a letter to the local news and it could be completely wrong. And that's as far as it would go. Whereas now, those fake stories and those fake news can actually reach a lot further than they ever did before. This is an issue for science because, we have a code of ethics as scientists. We have a responsibility to tell the truth, to interrogate the data, make sure we're telling the accurate story. We don't need to hype those stories. People want to be happy. We all want to be happy. We don't want to stress and fear and worry about the end of the world. Life's pretty complicated as it is. So we don't want to know that the world's about to collapse around us. We want to do something about it. We don't just want to give up. So this is the take-home from a lot of these stories. The insect apocalypse narrative tells us not that we shouldn't worry about insects, we should worry about them. But in worrying about them, we should get out and do something instead of going, oh God, they're all going to die, I'll just go and crawl under my bed. Uncertainty is inherent in science. It's part of science. That's what drives science, is not knowing stuff and then chasing that up. that uncertainty actually provides us with opportunities for hope. Not an excuse for inaction, just to clarify that. So I'll finish up with another fact. We do need to care about insects. There are no simple answers. Like everything, nature is complicated. Everything is complicated. Some insects are bad, some insects kill us sometimes. Most of them are pretty good. So stop killing them and start getting to know them. And think before you grab the spray bottle. Thank you.
So this is probably going to be a little bit jumbled because I haven't thought terribly hard about this, but given the prevalence of fake news, and more particularly the general feeling that when you confront people with facts, they just shut down and don't take anything on board, how do you combat fake news?
Anyone want to?
Other than go into a hole and die.
It's a hard question. There are academics that research this for a living because it is a real problem. My personal philosophy, and this is an opinion, not an expert advice, but you can't win everyone over. And I think that there are definitely people that will shut down, and that's obviously dependent on perceptions and cultures and beliefs and so on. I think the best approach is just to find relevance for people in the facts somehow, and I think, most people obviously don't want facts shoved down their throat, but if you can show them how those facts are relevant to them and their personal situation, they are more likely to then want to start a discussion and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I'll comment on that one too. It's difficult. This reminds me of the first question I ever got at a public lecture, which was, can you change someone's mind? And I went, only if they want to, which is really the answer. And
Physically, yes. Ethically, no.
yes, that's correct. Well, the human brain is very fallible to believing in things that aren't true. Like, it tells stories, and I think I was talking about it before when we spoke about how humans believe the lowest form of evidence very easily, which is the anecdote, because Uncle John did this, and you said it before, Grandpa smoked till he was 90, he never got cancer. So we believe those things. They're much more real to us than a double-blinded experiment that actually show the facts, because we make up our mind. The brain is full of bias. Especially cognitive biases. We believe what we want to believe in. It helps us, it's easy. So it is very difficult to spread the word to people that have strong beliefs, and beliefs are ideologies. And often when facts are presented to someone, even though there's overwhelming evidence to the contrary, that what you're believing in is absolute crap, you'll still prefer to believe in that than the overwhelming evidence. So it's a very, very difficult problem. Yep. We don't have an answer.
From the very large question back down in scale, Jean, we were just having a chat before about the dung beetle eggs. When those broods get made, are they made around an egg, or is an egg injected into them? Which comes first, the brood or the egg?
The brood comes first. So the parents, I say the parents, sometimes the male will help a female, but in a lot of cases it is the female who does the work. So she will make the brood first, and then she'll, depending on the species, she'll lay the egg in the chamber and then put a cap over it, or a lot of ball rollers will actually make the ball completely and then hollow it out again, lay the egg and then cap it over. But again, in some other species, the male, and I think this is quite cute, the male will actually make a brood ball, present it to the female and sort of, do you like what you see? So it's also used as a nuptial gift. So, but yeah, the brood ball comes first and then the egg is laid.
Well, actually, I was just going to follow up with a quick question. Do you recommend dung balls as proposal gifts, or is this a very species-based decision?
Yes.
Okay, Manu. Most of us like insects, but justify to me why we should like mosquitoes.
Come on.
Mosquitoes are awesome. So, and again, I'm not. The other unfortunate thing about insect ecologists and entomologists is we can generally only speak explicitly about a small group of insects because of the diversity. So I'm not a mosquito person. But as I do understand, there are only a very small proportion of all mosquito species that do actually spread disease. So a lot of them do not. Not a lot of them, but some of them don't. The other thing is, as I understand, that it's only the females that bite and drink blood, so the males don't spread disease. And some mosquitoes are really important pollinators for some plants. So they are not all bad.
And I'll just add to that, not to mention all of the aquatic life that eats mosquitoes. So it's also a really important food source as well.
Back on the topic of fake news and how it interacts with scientists, for all of you, what's the one bit of scientific fake news that you find the hardest to contend with or that interferes with your field the worst?
Ooh, that's it. Good one.
Off the top of my head, I struggle with the Mortine ads that say that all insects are bad, and particularly cockroaches, because yes, cockroaches can be dirty and bring things into our house on their feet that we don't like, but in natural ecosystems, they're actually really important decomposers and recycle nutrients and things like that. So I get frustrated with the Mortine ads, so I think they're fake news, but that's just me.
I haven't actually come across a lot of fake news so far that I know of. I guess Jurassic Park is one. That is, I guess, a really big fake news. But it's also great in getting dinosaurs into the public eye, I guess. But it is annoying having to explain, I guess, that velociraptors were the size of turkeys and all that every time I talk about Jurassic Park. But yeah, I guess there's people that don't believe that feathers existed on dinosaurs, but given that I don't particularly work in that area, I haven't come across a whole lot of that. So yeah, I guess that's a big one.
I mean, there's a lot. I think probably one of the most devastating fake news items that has to do with neuroscience was the link between the MMR vaccines and autism. Really, that has caused so much devastation, you know, and there's a couple of things that really piss me off, and it's flies and anti-vaxxers. So that's been really devastating. But there's so many, the wall of woo, at the chemist and all the things it's going to do for your brain. All the brain training game ads saying it's going to do this and that. Now, someone did ask before, because I did have that news item about remaining cognitively active could prevent Alzheimer's disease. And no, it doesn't prevent Alzheimer's disease. It is a disease. And all the brain training is not going to prevent the disease, but brain training is still a really, really good thing to do. Okay, so don't not do it. It's just not going to stop you from getting Alzheimer's disease. What that particular paper showed, which was really interesting, was that those nuns who remained cognitively active actually dealt with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease better than the nuns that weren't cognitively active, but they still got the disease process in the end. So I think it's the autism one that pisses me off the most.
Obviously, the insect apocalypse, but more generally, I think the biggest issue with insects for me is generalisations, and I think that's where a lot of the fake news comes from, that we tend to label entire groups of species that include hundreds and hundreds and thousands of species with completely contrasting life histories and ecology and all the rest of it, and we just go, they're all in this box and they all do this, and that is the thing that pisses me off the most.
apologise, this is particularly just for Tim. Maybe you could clarify something for me, but possibly you can't because it may not be your field. So one of the things I heard relatively recently about dinosaurs, and I did hope to get a clarification on this from somebody, was that at least in the early day of dinosaur excavation and I suppose the media hype around that, was that a lot of people wanting to put their own stamp on things created, from what I'm effectively paraphrasing here, a lot of unnecessary species, which could be just either sexual dimorphism or different stages of growth. Is there any truth to that? Do you know?
That's a great question. So back in the early days, they were basically describing dinosaurs from anything. Like if they had one tooth, they would name a brand new species, or one toe bone, and that's just something that doesn't really happen today through the scientific process. But I guess a lot of, down in Victoria, a lot of their dinosaurs are based off, a partial jaw. So when they find the postcranial material, they don't really know, does that belong to this species or that species? So that has made it difficult, but it used to happen quite a lot with people just wanting to get their name on a brand new species back then. Yeah.
I suppose I also want to know if that has been corrected.
Yes, a lot of them have been corrected and they've just become nomen dubiums so far. Yeah.
Hello. The nun study, didn't that demonstrate that Alzheimer's could be detected in a person in very early life?
Yeah, really good question. There's two Alzheimer's. There's the real one and the one we made up to get research money. So this is the way Alzheimer's actually works. There is a real Alzheimer's disease which is due to two genetic mutations, which is called the early onset Alzheimer's. It's a genetic mutation in amyloid precursor protein and an enzyme called presenilin. So those people get real Alzheimer's disease with all the pathologies of the plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles, etc. Now, the problem with the late onset sporadic Alzheimer's disease is that it's a form of dementia. Okay, and the reason why it's the largest form of dementia is because if you're not diagnosed with one of the others, say vascular dementia or frontotemporal dementias, okay, dementia associated with HIV, then you're lumped in as Alzheimer's disease. So it's a whole range of different disorders. So there's really two different ones. One's a real disease, and that's the disease we actually study. The other one's too difficult because it's so many different things. It's dementias that we can't put a label on. It's also very important to get a label, I think, because it helps, with medical practitioners and getting the correct amount of care and all of those things. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
So a dinosaur question. So it's thought that a meteorite killed the dinosaurs. Is that right?
There was a recent study that came out recently that supported the asteroid even more. I haven't read it, so I can't tell you much about it.
Yep.
But it's a combination of mainly the asteroid plus volcanic activity that was going on at the time.
Do they? I guess all birds have feathers and a beak. There quite a lot less diversity in birds than there is in dinosaurs. Why was it only the beaked and feathered dinosaurs that survived?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the end Cretaceous extinction, basically anything over, I think it's 30 kilos, couldn't survive or adapt to the changes. And I guess that particular bird plan was the best survival for that time period.
Yep, cool, okay.
Another dinosaur question. Do crocodiles technically count as dinosaurs? Because I know they're often called a modern-day dinosaur due to really having no major evolutions that I can remember over the last however long.
So crocodiles evolved before dinosaurs. So I guess they're related cousins, but they're not. Crocodiles aren't necessarily dinosaurs because they came quite a while before, and especially during the Triassic period or the Permian, crocodiles were the most dominant on land besides dinosaurs. And then there was an extinction event and dinosaurs just happened to take over. But no, they're not dinosaurs. The flying reptiles like pterosaurs as well also aren't dinosaurs. And the marine reptiles like the plesiosaurs and things like that also aren't dinosaurs. Yeah.
Were crocodiles bigger and then they shrunk?
Yeah, there was really large ones that are probably from like one end of the couch further than the other one. Oh, sorry. Some of them galloped and things like that. Some of them ate plants. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've had a lot of dinosaur questions. This is for everybody but Tim. Sell us on your fields that are not dinosaur related.
What was that, sorry?
Sell us on your field that is specifically what's cool about it that's not dinosaur related.
Well, who wouldn't like poo? Woo! In all seriousness, I think dung beetles are absolutely amazing because they take nature's waste and they use it. And there's so many benefits to it. It's not just them that are using it. They're enabling plants and other animals to also use it. And I think they're actually quite charismatic. I mean, the way that they do their little thing and they roll their little broods, and some mama dung beetles will actually stay with their broods for, I think it's about 6 months, and look after their broods and clean them, and like they're such good parents and they're just so cute. What else can I say? I think they're gorgeous, but that's just me.
Brains are trying to find out what a brain is.
Ditto what Jean said, but for all insects, that's the coolest thing about them is that they do keep us alive, and we have no idea because we're not paying attention.
That's the thing about the brain, we don't pay attention.
Alrighty, we might just have 2 more questions, I think, just so we don't run too long.
Manu, over here. Hi. Are there any citizen science projects about pollinators or insects? That could be a great way for us to learn more, because we're here for you.
I did not tell her to ask that.
She didn't.
There are lots of things. For insects generally, my best advice is get on iNaturalist because it's awesome for everything, but especially for insects, and it is the best way to get an ID for an insect that you're not quite sure what it is, as long as you have a decent photo that you can see characters of it. Upload it and someone will get you an ID. As far as specific projects goes, the Wild Pollinator Count runs twice a year, and I run that, so disclaimer there. And but it's a great way it runs in spring and autumn, and it's a great way to just get out and watch flowers in your backyard and see what insects are actually, other than honeybees, are actually visiting all your flowers.
Alrighty, and one last question there.
Perhaps a big one. I identified 3 things that I think are part of this problem of fake news and the scientific issues. And I'd say one is what I call the Murdock Syndrome, which is where you take truth and just perpetrate lies. The second is bad science, and we know about the reproducibility crisis that exists in behavioural sciences at the moment. And also Manu mentioned quite a few what we might call bad bits of science. And then the third is the sensualisation, where you take something that's simple and make it complex just so people will take interest in it. What do you think is the most significant? And to the extent that science has to take the blame, what do we do? I mean, is the journal's fault? Where's the fault lie?
I'll have a go. but you can't blame one thing. It's a systemic. Science is a system, and peer review is a system, and all of that. So, it is. Dodgy papers have been published forever. The very first scientific journal that was published is the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, or whatever it was called, in 1660 whatever. The very first issue of that first scientific journal had a snake oil paper published about some pseudoscience stone from Africa that was going to cure everything. So this is a problem that has happened forever. There will always be dodgy papers published. They will always slip through the cracks. We can't blame the whole system for that. I think it comes down to what aspect you're talking about. If you, as a consumer of news, cares about what you're reading, it's your responsibility, I guess, to understand more about where to look for alternative stories. If you don't necessarily think that a headline is true, look up about it, find the study, talk to people, that sort of thing. Everyone is part of the system, but we can't rely on one single component to make sure that every news is accurate.
Yeah, like Manu said, I think all three have a part to play, but I think as scientists, we need to take more responsibility. I think science is probably the best method we have for finding out the truth, if we can remain impartial to our data, which is difficult because we all have bias. And I guess the problem with scientists is it's people that do science, and we're under a lot of pressure. The system has some problems at the moment. I mean, we're under all this publish or perish pressure, so there's a lot of pressure on us to publish and get money, which I think degrades from quality science. And there's a lot of rubbish journals out there now too, which is, I mean, how many emails do you get every morning, Manu, from journals just saying publish with me, and they're all rubbish. So I think we need to take a step back as scientists and look at our integrity. You know, scientific integrity is a really important thing, and if we lose that, then science really loses what it is, which is the best method we have for finding out the truth. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I guess scientists should be producing the best quality work that they can that is accurate. But I also think that the journalists and the media that publish on these stories should, I guess, try to find a different sensationalization process because I don't want to out my family, but my family believe a lot of the headlines that get put out and all the conspiracy theories, like about the bushfires and things like that. So I think that getting them to tone that down and try and produce accurate forms of media is definitely one way to go. But I guess teaching the consumers to critically think and not believe everything that they read just because some random news place posted some heading that seemed very exciting or different. But yeah.
I think there's only a couple of things that I could add there is just, I mean, as scientists, we always have to uphold our integrity and our honesty, which I'm sure everyone here does. I always get very disappointed when I hear about scientific misconduct and things like that, because I just think you've ruined it for the rest of us who try so hard to do the right thing. So I guess, yeah, just keep in mind to make sure that we act with integrity and honesty, but also taking the time to talk to the public. You know, do events like this and chat to people at your local coffee shop and just, help the public realise that we are just people like you who know a lot about a particular area, and I guess, if we humanise it, we become more believable.
I don't think I could have said it better myself. I would have only added exactly what you said. If events like this are fantastic because we've got real scientists here and you can ask them questions. That's exactly what these sorts of events are about. And being able to get to the truth of the matter straight from the horse's mouth is a fantastic opportunity that a lot of places don't get. So Armidale's very lucky in that regard, I think. Would you all join me in giving our presenters this evening a big round of applause?